The series is simply God Knows Me. And last week we talked about God knows my person. He knows me, everything about me there is to know. Not only past, present, but future as well. We know the past. We're aware of the present. The future we don't know, but He knows. Tonight, as we look at Psalms 139, we'll be looking at verses 7 through 12. God knows my place. God knows my place. It's interesting. The aspect is that with God there are no little people, no people who are insignificant, unimportant. But with God there are no little places as well. And sometimes the place we are, we sometimes, I don't know about you, but I've had experiences where I've said, Lord, why this? Why am I here? Why this particular place? It could be work, it could be whatever in your life. But we say, why me? Why this place? But God has a purpose in the place we are. And sometimes we can't see that right now. We can't see it in the immediate present, but kind of looking backward, we have a sense of sometimes God allows us to understand why we were at that particular place at that particular time. And sometimes it means safety. It means that had we been on time, we would have been in an accident or we may have been killed. And God said, it's not your time yet. So you're going to be a little bit late in terms of travel and so forth. There's a statement that I came across, and I think I shared this with you one session before. I picked it up in Myrtle Beach, North Carolina, I guess about 35 years. It's a little plastic card, and it says, bloom where you are planted. Bloom where you're planted. And it shows this absolutely gorgeous little flower coming out of the side of a cliff. Just rocks. And that flower's coming out of the cliff. And I held on to that thing, and I still have it after all these years. I lost it for a period of time, fell down behind a filing case at the college, and I couldn't find it. And eventually I found it, put it back out. Bloom where you're planted. I want to share a couple of things with you from Psalm 139 here regarding the place. God knows my place. If we look at verses 7 through 9, He is present in the place I'm at. He is present wherever I am. Whatever place I'm at, He is present. Let's look at verses 7 through 9. Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend unto heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell or Hades, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea. It's interesting, as we look at that particular thing, He is present no matter where I am, whatever place I'm at, He is there. It's interesting, if you look at this, there are four ifs that are mentioned there. First of all, if I ascend up to heaven. The second one is if I make my bed in Hades or hell. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the sea. If I say, surely the darkness will cover me. Four ifs. There are also two questions there. The first question is, whither shall I go from thy spirit? Whither shall I flee from thy presence? I guess we could paraphrase that by simply saying you can run, but you can't hide. You can run, but you can't hide because God knows every place we are. Darkness doesn't have an effect. He can see right through the darkness as if it's light. There's another way. I didn't put the whiteboard up here because I still haven't passed the art test. But we'll use virtual tonight because this is the only little art thing I have. If you think about He is present in whatever place we're in, He's speaking about the heavens, as high as the heavens, and as low as Hades or hell. And then, of course, whatever's in between. So he is present in every possible situation that we're in. And there are times, no doubt, that we get in a situation, we're in a place where we just feel all by ourselves. You ever been there? A sense of being alone. Nobody here. Especially if it's a strange place, a place we've never been before. A physical place. And there are some places where you're alone and it's a little scary. But the writer reminds us here that there is no place that God is not present. And he's present with us. And he's present 24 hours a day. Never takes a vacation. He doesn't take time off. Always there with us. And he has an investment in us. He cares about us and about what we're doing and the place we are. Let's look at the second one. Not only is he present in the place we are at, but he also provides protection in that place. He provides security. Let's look at verse 10. Even there shall thine hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. He's talking about, he uses the comparison or the analogy of a hand, his hands. And he uses it two ways. He says, your hand leads me. It leads me. If we look at Psalm 138, 5 through 8, and we won't turn there because of time, but if we look at that, basically we'll find out there that the psalmist is talking about the hands of God actually protecting us against all kinds of assaults and that sort of thing. I remember hearing this story from Dr. Charles Schwindel. Do you remember him? He told the story, and I hope I get it right. My wife kind of rehearsed it with me coming up in the car and said, now don't add to this story. Just get it out, you know. So I'll give it a shot. He had been in a conference in a large city and spoken and so forth, and he was on his way back home, and it was a good distance. And it was late at night, and it was raining. And he said it was hard for him to stay awake. He was having difficulty staying awake. All at once, he looked up, and there was a fellow hitchhiking. So he said he pulled over, and the fellow got into the car, and they drove on, and he said, talk to me and help keep me awake. And he said, we drove for a good while, and he said, we came to this little restaurant, and he said, let's stop and have a cup of coffee. So he got out, and it's raining like crazy, just pouring down. Well, a little bit like today in places. We can identify with that. And he went in, and he said, I need to go to the restroom. So he ordered 2 coffees, and he went back to the restroom, came back a little bit later after a few minutes, and he said to the waitress, he said, well, what happened to the fellow who was with me? And she looked at him, and she said, there was no one with you. I wondered why you ordered 2 cups of coffee. He said, stood there for a couple of minutes, and he said, then I remembered, he said, when he got into the car, it was raining like crazy, but he was totally dry from head to toe. He said, I believe that was an angel that God sent to keep me awake so that I could make it home that night. God takes care of us in ways that we don't even know. He protects us in ways that we're totally unaware of. The second, he says, thy hand leads me. The second thing he says is that thy right hand holds me. Holds me. In John, you remember in John chapter 10, verses 27 to 29, he talks of, we read that before in one of the other sessions. He says, we are in Christ's hand, Christ is in God's hand, and nobody can open God's hand. That's the kind of protection that we have by virtue of our faith in Jesus Christ as personal Savior. We have protection. That's what I guess you could call that surround, not surround sound, surround protection. It's invincible. It's invincible. I'm reminded of the fact that, do you remember Joseph? Joseph he had a number of experiences. He had different places that God allowed him to go. First of all, he was out. You remember he went out to see his brothers. He was sent out there, and they had a pit, and he was cast into the pit. That's the first place. Then along came a band of people, and he was sold into slavery. And he went down, next place he went was Egypt. And then he went to Potiphar's house, and wherever he was, interestingly enough, whatever place he was in, you remember what it said? And God prospered him. God prospered him whatever place he was in. But in Potiphar's house, there was a little problem, because his wife was interested in Joseph, and Joseph was not interested in her. And he was cast into prison. And you remember that while he was in prison, there was a dream, and he interpreted the dream of one of the men. And he said, well, how can I repay you? And finally he was set free, one of the men. I forget whether it was the butler or the baker. Okay? So he promised, he said, when I get out of here, if I get out of here and your prophecy's correct, I'll not forget you. Well, that's what he said. It's not what happened. He forgot him. So eventually what happened was the king you remember he had a dream? Nobody could interpret the dream. So then he remembered his promise to Joseph. And he said, I know someone who can interpret your dream. Timing is everything with God. Sometimes he moves us from place to place sometimes, and we don't understand the timing. It doesn't make sense to us, but it makes sense to God. So he went, he interpreted the dream, was elevated from the prison to the palace, second in command. He was in charge of all the grain and everything else in preparation, the 7 years of plenty to prepare for the 7 years of famine. But the most significant, the place, you think about it, the pit, Egypt, jail, the palace. God was preparing him. But you remember, to me, the most exciting part of that is his brothers went down. His father sent his brothers down to Egypt because he heard there was food. And you remember he came into the presence of Joseph. They didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. And he said to all the associates and the people around him, he said, I want you to leave. Leave us alone. I want to have an audience just with these men. And at that point, he told them who he was. He said, I'm Joseph, the brother that you sold into slavery. And at that point in time, they thought they were dead, because all he needed to do was to give the word. They were dead. But that's not what he said. He made an interesting comment. He said, you meant unto me for evil when you sold me into slavery to get rid of me, but God meant it unto me for good, to save the nation. Talk about places. And if we think about it a little bit, think back about some of the places you've been in terms of work or travel. Maybe just you passed somebody and you had an opportunity to talk with them and maybe share the gospel with them. Let's look at the third thing. He not only is present with us, whatever place we're in, he not only provides protection in that place, but he also gives provision in that place as well. Let's look at verses 11 and 12. And if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day, and the darkness the light, and both are alike to thee. God's provision. So he's not only present, he not only provides protection, but he provides provision. Think of the Old Testament times. Remember when they left and they were, poor Moses, that was an experience. He had a lot of experience going different places, didn't he? The palace of the king. And then he ended up, because he decided he was going to take charge and, take care of the Israelites. And they said, "Who are you? Who are you?" And he killed one of the Egyptian overseers. Then the next 50 years, he's in the desert, actually watching sheep. You talk about a change in places from the palace to taking care of sheep. And then God approached him again, you remember the burning bush, and said, I've got a job for you. I want to send you back to Egypt to lead the people of Israel out. Another place. No, he said, I don't want to go. No, he didn't say it quite that way, did he? He said, he started with all kinds of explanations. They won't believe me. And what else did he say? I can't speak. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? I can't speak. So he went from Harvard to being a sheep tender, and now God says, we're going to send you back to Egypt to lead the people out. And God took care of that. But again, 3 different experiences of being different places but God was with him. And God said, I'm going to be with you and I'll take care of you. He said, I can't speak. Well, he gave him an assistant, and the assistant created problems for him, you remember? But he did. He delivered the people with God's help. Our needs. God provides our needs. God provides for our needs in sometimes unusual ways, in ways that we don't expect. Think back in terms of your own experience, where you've had a need and God provided the need. And he kind of delivers our provisions just in time. Just in time. Not early, not late, but just when we need it. Our nurturance. Darkness is like standing in a full blaze of light. God exceeds. Infrared goggles. That's the comment I put. He can see. Doesn't need goggles. He can see in the darkness. Let's go to Romans chapter 8 for just a minute. Verses 35 through 39. The Apostle Paul speaking here. Romans 8, 35 through 39. Talking here about provision. And actually it covers all 3 of these: his presence, his protection, and his provision. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are counted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all, this verse 37 is phenomenal, at least to me. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through Christ that loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus, our Lord. Talk about a program of total coverage. In terms of insurance, we've got total coverage. The presence of God with us continually, always. His protection, always there to protect us. And then he always provides for our needs. Let's make some applications here for just a couple of minutes. I came across a statement in a book called Winning the War in Your Mind by Craig Gottschall. I'd never heard of him before, but he's a pastor. And he made an interesting comment that I came across today. If you forget God is there, if we forget God is present with us all the time, he said, you won't talk to him. Then we don't pray. And then we decide we're going to take care of whatever the situation is by ourselves. I can take care of that. Until we get in the corner, we get against the wall, and then we say, help, help, Lord. But the amazing thing to me is that God still responds. And in spite of the fact that we sometimes wait till the last second, or when we're in the corner, when we see no way out of the situation, we call on him, he still responds because he loves us and he cares about us. Let me make the application here, a couple of thoughts here. Bloom where you're planted. Think about where you are right now. You may be at home, you're a housewife, and you say, well, that's not very important. It sure is. Because I tried to do some of those things when Treva had her knee operated on, and I thought they were fairly simple. So I had to do them, and they became complex. You know. Bloom where you're planted. Think back over your life a little bit. Can you identify times and circumstances and situations in which God allowed you to be at a particular place at a particular time to talk with a particular person who needed to be encouraged, or you had the opportunity to share the gospel of Christ with them? Or you were there to listen. I started to say just to listen. Cross out the just. Because listening is a powerful tool. Because there are times that we want someone to listen to us and somebody to understand what we're going through and the difficulty that we're struggling with. So it's not just listening. Listening is a phenomenal skill, and it's a gift. In our culture today, it's becoming more and more a rare issue, unfortunately. Gifts. What are some of the gifts? We're not talking about Christmas yet. What are some of the gifts a gift that God has given you that you have the opportunity to use? If the whiteboard were here, I'd say I wouldn't have to draw. I could write, you know. But think a little bit about that. What about some of the gifts that you have? You say, well, I don't have any gifts. Some of you women you can bake, you can cook. You can provide meals for individuals who are sick and ill. And you say, well, that's not very significant. You better believe it's significant to the person who's receiving it. You see someone, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone here at church, and they're struggling and they need some help. Maybe the grass cut. They're working on a project and they just need 2 other hands. They wouldn't need my hands if it's mechanical. You know, they would say, why don't you just go, leave. That's not my skill, not even close. But think about the opportunities that you've had to help people, to reach out to people. God is present with us. He provides protection in those situations, and he provides for our needs. And we have the opportunity to invest in the lives of other people by sharing some of the gifts that we have. Some of the things that we have. Sometimes it may be a financial gift. Sometimes it's some other gift, a listening, a card, an email. Think a little bit about where you are, the place you are right now, today. Begin to pay attention a little bit. Start watching and looking for opportunities in the place you are. If you're at the market, look for an opportunity. Say, Lord, I'm in the market here. Is there an opportunity here to talk to somebody? Just to say hello to them. Just to smile. Just to notice somebody who, as far as they are concerned, they're an invisible person. And there are lots of invisible people around us. Nobody notices them. You go to Walmart, it's kind of interesting. You go to Walmart. I noticed that this past week. I was in Walmart and I was just kind of walking through, and there are people doing little tasks, you know. And nobody speaks to them, at least as I was walking through. Nobody spoke to them. Nobody said hello. And they would kind of look up as they passed. And you speak to them, and it's kind of like it catches them off guard. And they speak back, and they'll smile back. That's no small thing to a person who, as far as they're concerned, are invisible. and is basically unimportant to other people. But that often gets their attention, and sometimes it even opens the opportunity to share the gospel with them. Little things. The places we are. So, there are no little people with God. No little people. There are no little places. So the rest of this week, as we go about our activities and responsibilities and so forth, just ask God, say, okay, God, the places that I'm at, help me to look for opportunities. Make me aware of the opportunity to reach out and have an impact on somebody else's life. And you'll be surprised, because what happens is that God begins to do that a little bit at a time. And some days when we don't necessarily feel like reaching out to somebody, God brings somebody across the path and says, I want you to speak to them. I want you to acknowledge them. And we do it. And the interesting thing is that not only are they blessed, but what happens is that we are blessed. It has an effect on our day as well. God knows me. He knows the person I am. He knows the places I have been and the places